Socialization brings about by communicating ethical standards to a developing child. His behavior is shaped by the acquired concept of what is right and wrong. The right way to behave is determined by one's level of moral development. Morality develops in sequential pattern. The growth of moral reasoning follows certain stages of moral development. Good morning, students. I am teacher Daisy, and today we are going to talk about the moral development theory according to Jean Piaget. So, moral development refers to the process through which children develop the standards of right and wrong within their society based on social and cultural norms and laws. Piaget conceptualizes moral development as a constructivist process whereby the interplay of action and thought builds moral and concept. So Piaget of 1965 was principally interested not in what children do, in whether they break rules or not, but in what they think. In other words, he was interested in children's moral reasoning. So Piaget found that children's ideas regarding the rules, the moral judgments, and punishments tended to change as they get older. In other words, just as there were stages of children's cognitive development, so we all know that Piaget proposed a cognitive development theory, so there were also universal stages to their moral development. That's why he proposed the two broad stages of moral development. The two stages were the moral realism and the moral relativism. So when we talk about moral realism, it is characterized as a naive assumption on the part of the children that rules are external, absolute, and unchanging. So moral realism, or the so-called heteronomous morality, this ranges from 4 to 9 or 10 years of age. So, in this stage, Piaget says that morality is imposed from the outside. Children regard morality as obeying other people's rules and laws, which they think cannot be changed. So, further, the children see themselves as inferior to adults, and from a mixture of fear, affection, and admiration, they adopt their parents' moral beliefs unquestioningly. So, as what you have noticed, no, if you still remember when you were a child, so you really obey your parents. So, in the process, you adopt an inflexible moral code based on obedience. So, that is the stage of the moral realism of Jean Piaget's moral development theory. So there is an example here that a little girl named Margaret went and took her mother's scissors one day when her mother was out. So she played with them a bit. Then she didn't know how to use them properly. So she made a little hole in her dress. The child is then asked, no, at this age of 4 to 9 or 10 years old, who is naughtier? So, according to the research findings, typically younger children at this age says that Margaret is a naughty child. Although they recognize the distinction between a well-intentioned act that turns out badly and careless, thoughtless, or malicious, they tend to judge naughtiness in terms of the severity of the consequence, the way that Margaret made a hole in her mother's dress. So that's the consequence of her action. So they tend to judge the consequence, rather than in terms of the motives of what Margaret wants, because Margaret wants to surprise her mother, right? So that's how children at this age judge that certain action. So this is what Piaget means by moral realism. However, as children get older, the circumstances of their lives change, and their whole attitude to moral questions undergoes a radical change also. So, an example of this is how children respond to a question about the wrongdoing of a member of their peer group. So, the moral relativism is the shift from moral realism. So, moral relativism is also known as the autonomous morality. This ranges from 9 or 10 years old. Morality is based on your own rules, from the word itself, autonomous. So children recognize that there is no absolute right or wrong, and that morality depends on the intentions and not on the consequences. So Piaget believed that around the age of 9 or 10 years old, children's understanding of moral issue underwent a fundamental reorganization. By now, they are beginning to overcome the egocentrism of middle childhood and have developed the ability to see moral rules from other people's point of view, so not from their own. A child who can decenter to take other people's intentions and circumstances into account can move to making the more independent moral judgments of the second stage. So, as a result, children's ideas on the nature of rules themselves, on moral responsibility, and on punishment and justice, so all will change and their thinking becomes more like adults in this moral relativism stage. So, at this stage, children now understand that rules do not come from mystical divine like source. So, they tend to become more dependent on the needs and desires of the group, and that moral judgment may become less absolute and authoritarian. So people make rules and that people can change them. So this is the view of the children during the moral relativism stage. And that rules are not inscribed on tablets of stones. So with regards to the rules of the game, older children recognize that rules are needed to prevent quarreling and to ensure fair play. So indeed, sometimes they even become quite fascinated with the whole issue and will, for example, discuss the rules of board games like the chess, monopoly cards, or sports, so the offside of the rule, with all the interest of a lawyer-like person. They also recognize that rules can be changed if circumstances dictate. Like, for example, you've got one player less, so we will give you a 3-goal start. And if everybody agrees, then it will become a rule. So with regards to issues of blames and moral responsibility, older children don't just take the consequences into account, they also consider motives based on the situation that I have given to you. So forgive me, there is an error of the name present in the presentation. So it is supposed to be a little girl named Margaret went and took her mother's scissors one day when her mother was out. Then she played for them a bit. Then she didn't know how to use them properly, so she made a little hole in her dress. So if you will ask a child under the moral relativism stage, he or she or that child will answer that typically, even though Margaret made a hole in her mother's dress, she was motivated by the desire to please her mother, and that this may cause less damage but did not act out the noble intentions. So, in the stage of moral relativism, the judgment of the child says that this is not that the intention is what to consider, and that the act of Margaret is not that bad because the intentions are clear and it is supposed to be a surprise. So at this stage, children begin to realize that if they behave in ways that appear to be wrong but have good intentions, they are not necessarily going to be punished. Thus, for them, a well-intentioned act that turned out badly is not that harmless because of the good intention. Okay? So to summarize everything, I will show you the Piagetian stages of moral reasoning. So the first stage is the premoral. It is up to 4 years old. The age range is up to 4 years old. So the characteristics of the children include that they have no understanding of the rules or the basis of the right and wrong. But when you go to the moral realism, the age range of this is 4 to 9 or 10 years old. Actions are judged by the material outcome. So just like my example lately, so if you are going to ask a 4 to 9 or 10 years old child, he will really say that Margaret is naughty because he made a hole in her mother's dress, which is the consequence of her doing, and that rules emanate from authority, cannot be changed, and that wrong is whatever adults forbid. So, the child's perception at this age is that when you do wrong, you will be punished, and adults don't like bad actions. Adults forbid wrongdoings. That's why they really think that he or she will be punished if he will do wrong or he will commit a mistake. Moreover, when we talk about moral relativism, the age range of this is from 9 or 10 years old. So, the characteristics of the stage is that children judged actions according to their intentions, and that rules are made by people and can be changed by mutual agreement, just like my example lately. And then wrong is transgression of moral principles. Um, it all goes to show that, in Piaget's opinion, children are now able to appreciate the significance of subjective facts of internal and responsibility. So, overall, Piaget describes the morality of the older child as an autonomous. So, adults usually belong to the autonomous stage. So, morality is subject to its own laws. So, the change is partly seen as a result of the child's general cognitive development, partly due to the declining of the egocentrism, and partly to the growing importance of the peer group. So, Piaget's theory of children's moral development can be seen as an application of his ideas on the cognitive development generally. So, I hope that you learned something. So, anyone who has questions and clarifications about my discussion? Okay, I think there's none. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. I am teacher Daisy, and I discussed about the moral development theory according to Jean Piaget. So I hope that you learned a lot in my discussion. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye and God bless you all.